17-year-old alien princess was stubborn, and a virgin until the humans showed up. The bulkhead exploded inward, showering the corridor in a spray of molten shrapnel and swearing. Jax shoved the girl behind him, the heat of the blast licking at the back of his neck. "Stay the fuck down," he snarled, firing his pulse carbine into the churning smoke. Return fire stitched a pattern of angry red holes across the metal wall beside his head. Too close. He dragged her around a corner, the grip on her arm bruising. She stumbled, regal even in a torn, simple tunic that did little to hide the proud curve of her hips or the defiant set of her jaw. "Unhand me, off-worlder," she commanded, her voice a low, melodious thunder that was completely at odds with their current about-to-fucking-die situation. "I am Lyra of the Ethel. I do not require your brute assistance." Jax risked a glance back. 3 figures in bulky envirosuits were advancing through the smoke, their helmet optics glowing a predatory green. Mercenaries. The same bastards who'd been hunting her. "Yeah, well, Lyra of the Ethel," he grunted, pulling her deeper into the labyrinthine guts of the derelict warship. "Right now, you're just baggage that bites. Move your royal ass." He didn't have a contract on her. His job was salvage. He'd been stripping a cruiser's reactor core when he'd practically tripped over her firefight with these goons. Some bleeding heart instinct he thought had died years ago made him intervene. Now he was hip-deep in shit with a princess whose sense of self-preservation was dwarfed by her sense of entitlement. She dug her heels in, yanking her arm from his grasp. Her eyes, the color of a stormy nebula, flashed with fury. "I am not baggage. I am your sovereign by trial of rescue. You are bound to my will." Jax laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the metallic silence between plasma bursts. "You're fucking delirious, lady. The only thing I'm bound to is getting out of this scrap heap alive. You can either follow me and maybe live to be a condescending bitch tomorrow, or you can stay here and explain your sovereignty to a laser drill. Your call." A fresh volley of shots ricocheted down the hall, forcing them both into a low crouch. The air tasted of ozone and rust. He saw the flicker of uncertainty in her gaze, a tiny crack in the marble facade. Good. Fear was a language everyone understood. He gestured with his carbine down a dark, narrow maintenance shaft. "Well, you coming, Your Highness?" She glared at him, her lips a thin, pale line. But she moved. They slid into the maintenance conduit, a space so tight their bodies were pressed together from shoulder to thigh. It was dark, smelled of lubricant and decay, and every scrape of their boots seemed to echo for miles. Jax held his breath, listening. The heavy, rhythmic stomping of the mercs grew louder, then past their hiding spot. He let out a slow, controlled breath, the tension coiling in his gut starting to ease. The girl, Lyra, was a rigid line of defiance against his side. He could feel the rapid beat of her heart through his worn jacket, or maybe it was his. "They are gone," she whispered, her voice losing some of its imperious edge, replaced by a tremor she couldn't quite hide. "For now," Jax corrected, his own voice a low rasp. He didn't move. The proximity was a problem, a big one. She was all sharp angles and soft curves, a contradiction that was doing a number on his focus. He was bleeding from a graze on his forearm, a warm trickle sliding down to his wrist. "You are injured," she stated, her gaze fixed on the dark stain spreading on his sleeve. It wasn't a question of concern. It was an observation, a tactical assessment. "Sharp eye," he grunted, shifting his weight. A mistake. The movement pressed his thigh firmly against hers. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through him. He saw her pupils dilate in the gloom. "You are large for a primate species," she said, her tone clinical, but her breathing hitched. Jax almost choked. "I'm human. And you're not exactly a pixie yourself." He could feel the warmth of her, the solid reality of her body. Underneath the arrogance, there was a current of something else, something wild and alive. "Your biology is inefficient. All this exposed skin, so vulnerable." Her hand lifted, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Her touch was surprisingly soft, hesitant. It was the first time she'd initiated contact that wasn't a struggle. "And yet," he murmured, his voice dropping, "we're still here." He turned his head slightly, his lips brushing the tips of her fingers. A spark. She snatched her hand back as if burned. Do not presume such familiarities, she snapped. But the command was hollow, breathless. He saw it then, beneath the layers of pride and ritual. She was young, terrified, and just as affected by this damned proximity as he was. Right. My mistake, he said, the sarcasm a shield. Wouldn't want to tarnish the royal personage with my grimy primate fingers. A humorless smile touched his lips. Just trying to keep you from getting a hole burned through that pretty stubborn face. The Merc's patrol pattern forced them deeper into the ship's decaying bowels. It was a hellscape of sparking conduits, groaning metal, and sudden unnerving silences. Jax led them through the skeletal remains of a hydroponics bay, the dead brittle vines crunching under their boots like old bones. He moved with the quiet economy of a predator. She followed, her earlier protests silenced by the sheer oppressive danger of their surroundings. A support beam, groaning under the strain of a century of neglect, suddenly gave way. It crashed down just behind them, sending up a plume of rust-colored dust. Instinct took over. Jax spun, grabbing Lyra and pulling her flush against his chest, shielding her with his body as debris rained down. Her hands flew up to his shoulders, clinging to him. For a solid 10 seconds, they were a single entity. His chin was buried in her silvery hair, which smelled faintly of ozone and something else, something alien and floral. He could feel every sharp intake of her breath, the frantic hammering of her heart against his ribs. He felt protective, a fucking stupid emotion for a jaded salvager to feel. He let her go, stepping back. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. She nodded, her face pale in the dim emergency lighting. Her eyes were wide, fixed on him. "Your reflexes are adequate," she managed. He saw her gaze drop to his back, then her eyes widened slightly. "The mark," she whispered, pointing. Jax tensed. "What mark?" "On your back, the scar tissue. It is a brand of shaming, a declaration of incompetence." "Who dishonored you so?" she asked, her voice laced with a strange mix of pity and clinical curiosity. He froze, his blood running cold. She wasn't talking about the lashings he'd gotten in a Kregan labor pit. She was looking at the faded, stylized tattoo on his shoulder blade, the insignia of his old Spec Ops unit. The unit he'd failed, the men he'd lost. "That's not a brand of shame," he said, his voice flat and hard. "It's a reminder." "A reminder of your failure?" she pressed, tilting her head. "Athelian warriors are marked so when they break formation and cost a victory." "Just drop it," he growled, turning away from her, the old guilt a fresh, hot wound. He pushed forward, leaving her in the dust. Her alien customs had just scraped across the rawest nerve he had. He didn't see the flicker of confusion and regret in her eyes as she watched him go. They found a defensible position hours later, a small, shielded medbay, its blast door still partially functional. The air inside was sterile and cold. A single diagnostic bed, more a slab than a mattress, was the only furniture. The power was unstable, the main lights flickering on and off, plunging them into alternating moments of harsh clinical glare and absolute darkness. Jax managed to wedge the door shut. For the first time in what felt like days, they were relatively safe. He slumped against a wall, his carbine resting across his knees. Lyra stood in the center of the room, looking profoundly out of place. "We need to get our stories straight," he said, breaking the silence. "When we get out of this, what's the play? I'm not taking the fall for spiriting away a princess." Lyra's back straightened, her eyes narrowed with a sudden intense focus. "A bonding testimony? Now? Here? It is. An unorthodox setting." Jax stared at her. "A what?" "No. A story. A lie. What we tell people." She took a deliberate step toward him, her expression a mask of solemnity. "There are no lies in a bonding testimony, human. It is a ritual of absolute truth, shared between two who have faced the void together. One speaks, the other bears witness. It is how a claim is solidified. I did not realize your culture shared this right." He scrubbed a hand over his face, a wave of exhaustion and utter disbelief washing over him. This was the second time her bizarre-ass culture had sideswiped him. "Okay, look. Forget I said anything. Human bonding testimonies involve a lot of cheap booze and usually end with someone getting punched. It's not the same thing." A slow smile, the first genuine one he'd seen from her, touched her lips. It transformed her face, making her look less like a statue and more like a girl, a dangerous, beautiful, and utterly confusing girl. Your rituals sound chaotic, primitive. Yeah, well, we like to have a good time, he shot back, a hint of his own smile returning. Tell me, Your Highness, what's the Athelian version of a good time? Reciting blood oaths and comparing honorable scars? Her smile vanished. Sometimes, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The lights flickered and died, leaving them in the pitch black. He heard her take a sharp breath. The darkness was suddenly intimate, charged with everything unsaid between them. The darkness held for a long time. The only sounds were their breathing and the distant groans of the dying ship. When the emergency lights finally flickered back on, casting a dim, red glow over the medbay, she was sitting on the edge of the diagnostic slab, her arms wrapped around herself. The bravado was gone. She just looked small and cold. They weren't just mercenaries, she said, her voice barely audible. They were hired by the elders, by my own blood. Jack stayed silent, watching her. This was new territory. Not defiance, not command. Confession. I am 17 of your standard years, she continued, not looking at him. Of age, I was to be bonded to a patriarch of a rival clan, a political merger to quell a feud. He is old, cruel. As part of the union, I would have to undergo the purity trial. She shuddered, a full-body tremor. It is a ritual of pain to prove fertility and fealty, to break you so you can be remade in your bonded's image. I refused. I ran. So that was it. Not just a stubborn princess, but a runaway fighting for her own body, her own soul. Suddenly, her arrogance made a different kind of sense. It was armor. And the mark of shame you thought you saw on my back? Jax asked quietly. Is that what they give you if you fail this trial? She finally looked at him, her nebular eyes swimming with a depth of pain that stole his breath. No, she whispered. There is no failure. Only survival or death. They mark you when you are claimed. A brand of ownership. He felt a muscle in his jaw tighten. He was a bounty hunter, a salvager. He dealt in things, not people. But the casual brutality she spoke of, the idea of her being owned and remade, stirred a black protective rage in his chest. He pushed off the wall and walked over to the medbay's supply locker. He rummaged through it and found 2 thermal blankets. He tossed one to her. She caught it, surprised. Thanks, she murmured. He sat on the floor, his back against the slab she was on, not touching but close. I was in a unit, he said, the words tasting like rust. Spec Ops. We walked into an ambush on Cygnus X1. Bad intel. My fault. I was the only one who walked out. He tapped the tattoo on his shoulder. This isn't a brand of shame. It's their names. I carry them so I don't forget. He didn't know why he told her. Maybe because she'd shown him her wound, so he showed her his. The room was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was filled with the weight of shared ghosts. The ship gave a deep, shuddering groan, a death rattle that vibrated through the floor. The emergency lights flickered violently, then died for good. This time they didn't come back. The darkness was absolute, and with it came the cold, a deep, penetrating chill that seeped through their clothes and settled into their bones. The derelict's life support was in its final death throes. Jax heard Lyra's teeth begin to chatter. Shit, he muttered, his own breath pluming in front of his face, visible even in the blackness. Core temperature is bottoming out. We're going to freeze if we stay apart. He felt more than saw her slide off the slab. He stood up, pulling his own blanket tighter around his shoulders. It wasn't enough. Survival instincts stripped away the last of their pretense. There was no princess, no salvager, just 2 warm bodies in a dying metal tomb. Here, he said, his voice a low command. He opened his blanket, an unspoken invitation. She hesitated for only a second before stumbling into the space, pressing against him. He wrapped the blanket around both of them, then draped hers over the top. It was clumsy, awkward, and absolutely necessary. Her body was a shock of cold against his, but slowly, their shared heat began to build a small pocket of warmth in the suffocating dark. Her head ended up tucked under his chin, her silver hair tickling his skin. Her hands were pressed flat against his chest. He could feel her shivers slowly subside. The line between survival and something else began to dissolve. "Human," she whispered, her voice muffled against his jacket. "Jax, Jax," she repeated. The sound of his name on her alien tongue was strange, intimate. This forced proximity, is it another of your chaotic rituals? He let out a low, humorless chuckle. "No, this is just basic thermodynamics." Her hand flexed on his chest. "My people believe that shared warmth in the face of the void is the first step of a claim. It attests that one life is worth preserving at the cost of your own comfort." "Sounds intense," he managed, his throat suddenly dry. Her face tilted up, and though he couldn't see her, he felt her gaze on him. "It is." The air was thick with it. The danger, the cold, the confessions, the raw physical reality of their bodies pressed together. He lowered his head, guided by instinct, by the sound of her breath. His lips found hers in the dark. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision, a desperate, hungry claiming of life in the face of death. She met him with equal force, her mouth opening under his, her hands clutching at his jacket. The kiss was a fight, a question, and an answer all at once. The kiss deepened, becoming a frantic exploration in the freezing dark. It was a war of tongues and teeth, a battle for dominance that neither was willing to lose. He backed her against the cold metal of the medbay slab, his hands tangling in her hair while hers clawed at his back. The blankets fell away, forgotten. The cold was a sharp counterpoint to the fire they were building between them. This wasn't seduction. It was combustion. He broke the kiss, gasping for air that felt like ice in his lungs. His hand slid down her body, mapping the strong, defiant curves of her. She was all muscle and power, a warrior princess to her core. "Is this how you claim something, Jax?" she breathed, her voice ragged. "By force, by overwhelming it?" "I'm not claiming anything," he growled, his lips finding the sensitive skin of her neck. "I'm just trying to stay warm." A blatant lie. He wanted her. He wanted to strip away that infuriating pride and find the fire beneath. She arched against him, a low sound rumbling in her chest, part pleasure, part protest. He found the hem of her tunic and pushed it up, his cold hands meeting the shocking heat of her skin. She gasped, her whole body going rigid. For a second he thought he'd gone too far, but then she moved, not away, but into him, her hips grinding against his with an instinctual rhythm that was both innocent and deeply carnal. It was a surrender and a challenge, a silent dare. In a fluid motion, he lifted her onto the slab. The fight bled away, replaced by a raw, desperate need. Clothes were a clumsy obstacle, torn away with frantic hands. Her skin seemed to glow in the oppressive darkness, a pale, living sculpture. As he entered her, she cried out a sharp, piercing sound. Her nails dug into his shoulders, not in protest, but in a desperate anchor against the storm. It was rough, punishing, and utterly honest. Every thrust was a shared secret in the dark. As the climax built, a consuming wave of heat and pressure, her entire body tensed. Her Athelian instincts, primal and undeniable, took over. Just as he poured himself into her, she surged up, her teeth sinking into the muscle of his shoulder. The pain was sharp, electric, a bolt of lightning that lanced through the pleasure. He roared, a sound that was lost in the vast, dead ship. She collapsed beneath him, trembling, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The act was done, but in the ringing silence that followed, a new reality began to dawn, sharp and terrifying as the bite mark now cooling on his skin. The adrenaline faded, leaving only the biting cold and the echoing consequences of their actions. Jax rolled off her, his shoulder screaming. He reached up, his fingers coming away sticky and wet. Blood, his blood. "What the fuck was that?" he snarled, the words cutting through the darkness. "What the fuck did you do to me?" He heard her shift on the slab, the sound of a sharp, shaky intake of breath. When she spoke, her voice was different. Gone was the command, the vulnerability, the passion. It was replaced by a hollow, awestruck terror. It is a claim," she whispered as if speaking to herself. "A protest claim." He scrambled for his pants, his mind racing. This wasn't a hickey. This was ritual. This was that fucked up culture of hers crashing headlong into his life. A protest against what? Me not using a coaster? His sarcasm was a thin, brittle shield against a rising tide of panic. No, she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. A protest against the claim of another. By marking you, by taking you as my first, I have declared my intended bond. My body has rejected the Elder's decree. It is an act of rebellion, an act of war. Jax froze, the full weight of her words hitting him like a physical blow. You marked me, like a piece of property. Your property. Not property, she corrected, and he could almost hear the shake of her head in the dark. A consort. My chosen. In the eyes of my people, you are now mine. He finally found the emergency flash gel on his belt and cracked it. A harsh, chemical green light filled the medbay. Lyra was huddled on the slab, clutching a blanket to her chest. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, but it was the look in those stormy nebula eyes that chilled him to the bone. It was possession. It was reverence. It was the look of someone who had just sealed both their fates. He looked down at his shoulder. In the green light, the bite mark was stark and brutal. It wasn't just teeth marks. Her saliva had reacted with his skin, leaving an intricate silvery pattern that resembled a starburst. It was a brand. Permanent. Fuck, he breathed. The mercenaries outside were no longer just a problem. They were a secondary threat. If her people found them now, they wouldn't just kill her. They would challenge him for the right to own her, or kill him for defiling a princess. His simple salvage run had just escalated into an interstellar incident, and he was standing at ground zero with a living, breathing declaration of war branded into his skin. The silence that followed stretched for an eternity, thick with the scent of sex and blood. The faint green glow of the flash gel painted their faces in sickly hues. Jax's anger was a hot, hard knot in his gut, but beneath it, a colder, more pragmatic fear was taking hold. He was no longer a neutral party. He was a player in a game he didn't understand, marked as a key piece on the board. Lyra finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. They will hunt you now, Jax, as fiercely as they hunt me. Yeah, I got that part, he snapped, pacing the small room. He felt trapped, cornered. Thanks for the fucking promotion. From rescuer to primary target. It was not my intention, she said, pushing her silver hair back from her face. It was instinct. My bloodline responded to the trial of our survival. To you. Your bloodline needs to learn some goddamn manners, he muttered. He stopped pacing and faced her, pinning her with a hard glare. So what now, Your Highness? What's the protocol for when you accidentally make a dirty, half-broke human your royal consort? For the first time she looked uncertain, truly lost. I do not know. No one of my station has ever made a protest claim with an off-worlder. The law is silent because the act was considered impossible, unthinkable. We're good at the unthinkable, you and I, he said, a grim smile twisting his lips. He heard it then. Faint rhythmic scraping sound from the direction of the blast door. They were back, and they were being systematic, trying to cut through the lock. The banter was gone. The anger was shelved. Survival mode kicked back in, sharper and more focused than before. Their dynamic had been shattered and reforged. He was no longer just protecting a girl. He was protecting his own skin, which was now inextricably linked to hers. She was no longer just a princess. She had made a choice that left her with no allies but the strange, violent man she had branded. He snatched his carbine. She stood up, her blanket falling to the floor, her nakedness forgotten in the face of the immediate threat. She looked at him, her gaze clear and resolute. There is a service shuttle, she said. In the forward launch bay, Bay 7. It is small but shielded. It might still have power. He nodded, his mind already calculating routes, choke points, and ammunition. Let's go. There was no more argument, no more debate over who was in charge. They were a unit now, bound by a bite mark and a shared death sentence. They moved through the darkened corridors like ghosts, a single silent entity. The scraping at the medbay door bought them time. He took the lead, carbine up, his senses on a razor's edge. She followed a half step behind, her eyes scanning the shadows, her movements fluid and silent. The power struggle between them had evaporated, replaced by the grim efficiency of two soldiers fighting the same war. They reached a junction, and Jax held up a hand, signaling a halt. He peered around the corner. Two mercs stood guard at the far end of a long gantry, their bulky forms silhouetted against the faint starlight filtering through a breach in the hull. No way around. Lyra touched his arm, her touch surprisingly steady. She pointed up toward a network of massive power cables suspended from the ceiling. It was a risky climb, exposed and difficult, but it would take them over the guards' heads. He looked at her, then at the cables, and gave a sharp nod. He went first, testing the thick, dusty cable for strength before pulling himself up. His wounded shoulder protested with a searing bolt of pain, but he bit back a groan and hauled himself into the superstructure. He turned and reached down for her. She took his hand without hesitation, her grip strong and sure. He pulled her up, her body light and agile. For a moment they were face to face in the rafters, breathing the same cold, metallic air. He saw the silvery mark on his shoulder reflected in her wide eyes. The reality of their bond, of their predicament, hung between them in the silence. They shimmied across the cables, a slow, agonizing process. Below, the mercs talked in low, guttural tones, their voices drifting up. Just as they reached the other side, Jax's foot slipped on a patch of condensation. He dangled for a heart-stopping second, his full weight on his arms. Lyra's hand shot out, grabbing his belt and stabilizing him. Their eyes locked. A silent acknowledgement, a shared debt. They dropped down into the shadows and pressed on. They reached the launch bay doors, massive steel gates that were sealed tight. A control panel flickered beside it. Lyra stepped up to it, her fingers flying across the alien interface. "My family's command codes," she whispered. "They should still be active." With a deep groan of protesting metal, the huge door slid open a few feet. An alarm blared, a whooping cry that echoed through the bay. "So much for stealth," Jax grunted, shoving her through the gap. The shuttle was there, a sleek black dart of a ship, looking impossibly pristine in the decaying hangar. As they sprinted across the deck, plasma bolts started searing the air around them. He laid down covering fire while she scrambled up the boarding ramp. He dove in after her, slamming the ramp control. Just before it sealed, he saw her, standing in the cockpit doorway, watching him. Not with fear, but with an intense, unwavering focus. The shuttle powered up with a hum. As they lifted off, leaving the derelict and the mercenaries behind, he stalked into the cockpit. He grabbed her by the arms, not gently. "This mark," he said, his voice a low growl. "Tell me exactly what it means." Lyra didn't flinch. She met his gaze, all the pride, all the fire from their first meeting returning to her eyes, but tempered now with something new, something forged. "It means you are the only one I will ever kneel to," she said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell, "and the only one who can stand beside me." It wasn't love. It was a challenge, a promise. It was the beginning of a whole new kind of war. And he was, God help him, all in.